Hey guys, for today's guest, I have Dennis Doomen, or the continuous improver as he's called on LinkedIn. Love that handle. We talked about quality and what it means for software, and he lays out internal and external quality, which to me made perfectly sense. It was very interesting to listen to. Enjoy.
Beyond Coding. Welcome to Beyond Coding, a dive into the world of successful people in IT. From your sponsors, Zebia, creating digital leaders. Here's your host, Patrick Akil.
Hey Dennis.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
How's it going?
Good. Nice to be here. It's an honor to be here, actually. I'm excited.
That's awesome to hear. I love your LinkedIn tag. It says Dennis, the continuous improver. Why is that there?
On an everlasting quest for finding better solutions to build, Yeah. It's funny. It's actually triggered by a book. It's called Soft Skills. It's written by John Summers, an American developer.
Yeah.
And obviously the book is about soft skills. And one of the things he said was that if you want to market yourself a bit better, think about the niche or the things that make you unique. I mean, everybody is unique in some sense, both in a good and a bad way. And I realized I like a lot of stuff. I have a very broad interest.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a T-shaped person. So I care about architecture, obviously. I care about quality of code, and we'll talk about that today, I guess. But I also care about, like, how do you get teams to work together? What tools do you need? Because architecture these days is not just architecture. It's not just about drawing layers and diagrams and defining abstractions. It all ties together. I mean, Conway's Law is a nice example of how your architecture is influenced by the physical organization of your teams. So for me, I'm interested in everything. I go to... Well, I occasionally I speak at conferences, but I also visit conferences like in the US. There's QCon, and I typically go to like vastly different subjects. So I like to hear, like, how did GitHub actually scale the organization?
Yeah,
what did they do to keep people motivated, or how do you address the culture of the people in the company? But I'm also interested in tools, build pipelines, and how can you make your things work better? How do you do project management with teams across? So it's so broad that I'm interested in. I mean, I have some things I really care about.
Yeah.
C#, .NET, coding standards, that kind of stuff is my thing. Testability, but all the other things are part of that.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm not going to be the .NET guy to go to. I'm not going to be agile coach. Because my job is typically to go into a company and try to optimize the entire software development effort.
Yeah.
Everything. From
all of it.
And that thought, okay, so what am I doing? Well, I'm always trying to learn. I'm 47 now, but I'm still trying to learn.
Yeah.
Continuous improver.
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't like the ring of it.
Really?
Yeah.
I love it.
I have the feeling something is wrong in the, like a grammar mistake or something. But I've checked it a couple of times with the native speakers.
Accurate. Yeah. I mean, it's very valid.
So that's me. Cool. Always trying to look for better ways to do my job and help my clients, obviously.
Yeah. I think you and me are very similar in that, because
cool.
I love also the wide range that comes with building software, how an organization is structured, how to manage teams, efficiency, effectiveness, all that stuff. But I always thought it was initially a bad thing. Like really early on in my career, I thought I need my niche, right? I need that depth in some of the aspects. So I'm glad to hear that you still have kind of the same broad interest, except you also have found your niches here and there.
And that's the thing. I mean, if you stay on this, if you end up become very superficial, like you know a little bit about this, a little bit about that, then there's not a lot that makes you unique.
Exactly.
I mean, there's plenty of people that can talk about a lot of topics on a superficial level. So you need to have, like, I have a lot of experience with event sourcing, domain-driven design, that kind of stuff. I've been maintaining like libraries for unit testing for the last 10 years. That keeps me grounded to that technology.
Yeah.
So you don't see me going to Java, for instance.
Exactly.
But I do embrace TypeScript and a bit of JavaScript, because it's cool. And it's, well, cool is never a goal in itself, but it enables, things to be built in a reliable and maintainable way. So I care about that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they're all adjacent, right? And you don't have to go all the way across the street. You can just go next door and find common things there, common ground.
True. Yeah. And you need to know the people. I mean, if you know that there's certain areas that you, at least how it works, what it's supposed to do, but you want to understand the nitty-gritties. Either I will dive into it myself, because I've learned, at least I think, I master new stuff pretty well. I can put it in perspective with everything I've done in the past. But it's also good to know the people that actually can help you bring further.
Yeah.
You know, freelancers, people in your own company, somebody on the internet. Twitter for me is almost like better than Google.
Really?
If I want to get some opinions, I just put a tweet out.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just give me the answer back that I could also Google myself.
Sure.
But obviously, it's better if you get some like real experiences. People say like, okay, I've used this. It works for this and this reason. Much more useful.
Yeah, it's always a community. And I always say when someone's new in the team, like if you have any question, I'd rather you ask me than spend half a day trying to figure things out yourself, because I can give you the answer and you'll be more effective and you'll learn just as much.
Exactly. Or you delegate it to somebody who can answer the same question as you can. Yeah, that's I tend to do the same thing.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to get someone up to speed real quick and be effective in their own way, right?
Yeah, because you have, I mean, what you see is that like not junior, but reasonably inexperienced people join a company and they're afraid to ask the architect or something like that, you know, or that's the architect.
Yeah.
But
the continuous improvement.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you work long enough with me, then you see also the other side of that. But in reality, I mean, people are maybe afraid to ask you questions.
Yeah.
And the first thing I tell them, like, you know, you can always ping me on Slack or Teams or whatever, approach me. I might be busy at some point, but I might also decide to, you know, forward you to somebody who can answer the same question just as well as I can. So that's totally fine, because people are looking for a way in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they start drowning in the company. Like, where do I find this information? If you use SharePoint, you won't be able to find anything because there's just it's a void.
Rabbit hole.
Yes. So you need to be reachable.
Yeah.
I try to be.
Me too. I always say call me, because that's the fastest way of communicating me.
Yeah.
And I will call you back or I'll answer, but I'll definitely get back to you. That's the most important part.
I try to do the exact same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's.
I'm just thinking in the back of my mind if the people that I work with on day-to-day basis actually agree with that. If it's me being naive I mean, I should know by now, I would say.
Yeah, right.
Cool.
I mean, I've had those same thoughts, which is pretty funny, I guess, in a way, because I always say that. I say, call me. But some people might say, well, Patrick texts a lot more than he actually makes out to be. I hope it's not the truth.
Well, you try to do your best, right?
Right.
It's the intent that's important here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Today, I really wanted to talk to you about what is quality in software development, right? A lot of people throw out the term, like, I want my stuff up to quality standards, quality here, quality there. I have kind of a definition in my head, but it's so abstract. And I thought you might have a very valid opinion.
I definitely have an opinion about that. Whether it's valid, it's to be debated.
We'll decide.
But yeah, it's indeed. If you talk with teams and POs, product owners and managers, you're right. Everybody has a different definition, and also they mean a different thing. I mean, if you talk to a product owner or your manager or a client, when they talk about quality, they most of the time talk about the observable things of a system.
Yeah.
So which could be the UI experience, the intuitivity, maybe the performance, the responsiveness, that kind of stuff. But maybe they also, you know, when you talk about bugs, that's obviously always associated with quality.
Yeah.
But when I talk about quality, I typically try to think about the internals of what you're building as a software developer.
Yeah.
And to make that distinction, I don't know if I actually came up with this by myself or I heard it at some conference. I don't remember exactly, because I like to give credits that deserve it. But I make a distinction between internal and external quality.
Yeah.
So external quality is what I just mentioned, the observable behavior. Internal quality says something about the maintainability, which by itself is also an abstract term.
Yeah.
But maintainability, testability, discoverability, traceability, and a couple of other entities, which I forgot for now. But those things say something about the ability for a developer to, first of all, understand where something is solved. So, you know, do you actually know which repository, which part of the repository, which folder, which module this is supposed to be solved?
Yeah.
That's one aspect of it. Then you probably want to look at the unit test or the automated test, understand, okay, what is this thing supposed to do? So the tests for me are almost like, that's the promise of test-driven development. It's your documentation. For me, it is.
Yeah.
Because I look at the test and try to understand. And that, by the way, that all depends on how functional the test is.
Exactly.
I know a lot of developers that love to create really technical cryptic names. I care because I first want to understand, okay, all these test scenarios that I can see in my IDE, and I actually look at the list. Okay, this is kind of the behavior. And then I look at the test itself. Is it actually doing what I was expecting it to do, and how is it doing it?
Yeah.
And then only then I start to understand, okay, this is the module that's responsible for something. This is what the API looks like. This is the kind of the semantics of that component. And then I go into the implementation. So then I can actually look at the name of a method.
Yeah.
And you can see me, I'm looking a little bit in the corner because I have this mental model. And I'm a visual person.
It feels like that.
Yeah. And then I look at the name of the class, the name of the method, or if it's Java, TypeScript, the function or something like that. Function component, and try to understand, okay, what does that do?
Yeah.
Is that actually, does it make sense? Do I understand the responsibility of that thing in the broader picture?
Exactly.
So it shouldn't be called a manager because that doesn't say anything, but the name should be important. And then I look at the implementation to understand, okay, how does it do it?
Yeah.
I think there's then one thing missing is why.
Exactly.
And a lot of developers think that the code is the documentation. I disagree. Strongly disagree with that.
Yeah.
The code tells you what it does right now.
Exactly.
And if you use good naming, then at least you can understand what it's supposed to do, hopefully.
Yeah.
And if it is not clear, then by all means use documentation. Use inline comments, like some people say, code comments. No, you shouldn't use that.
It's not a museum.
Yeah,
I've
no,
heard that.
but that's complete. I don't know if I can say that, but that's BS.
Ah.
Because in the end, there's no single rule that's applicable to every situation.
Yeah.
If you cannot actually express your intent in the code sufficiently enough, put some comments on it to explain it to the next person.
Yeah.
But it doesn't answer the why.
Exactly.
That's where source control comes in. So I also care about a clean source control history. I want to be able to go to GitHub or God help me, Team Foundation Server or Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to see like, okay, why was this line changed? And then click on the pull request and understand from the description of the pull request and the title, why was this needed in the first place?
All the context.
The context of it.
Yeah.
And again, that's also something that's not easily solved by everybody, because I see a lot of pull requests that have a lot of mixed things. So there's lines of code changes that really don't have anything to do with the purpose of the pull request, if I look at the title. But it's like unrelated refactoring.
Yeah.
So for me, and I'm pretty adamant or maybe a bit rigid in that, I try to also separate the changes. So if I have a pull request with some refactoring, I put it in a separate commit. Because I know, 25 years of experience, I've looked at a lot of code bases. I want to be able to go back in time and understand why was that changed. Because I've seen people come and go. Yeah. And at some point you lose the capability to talk to the person to provide background. And actually, to be fair, after 6 months, they don't know either themselves.
Exactly.
And then you want to go back into the source control. So that's all part of internal quality.
Yeah. It's a lot. And I think it's overlooked. Even the fact, the last one, the why and the context, it's so important in how things change, right? Because the thing you'll see live is the assumption of the dev team, right? They get some requirements, they make some assumptions, and it's either truthfully, rightfully so, the way it is, or it might be incorrect. Yeah. But that context, that why, is very important, and it's still as important months down the line.
And it's surprising how many software developers don't care about this. They just don't see the value of that. Yeah. And it's particularly visible in the front-end community where, excuse me for saying, but it seems to be they're a lot less mature than the back-end community.
Okay.
I run into a lot of JavaScript developers that just don't get that yet. They don't care about this stuff. They don't. I had a big discussion with a guy about using the explicit type in TypeScript. Yeah. And they said, but if it's wrong, compiler will complain at some point. I said, yes, it will complain, but not at the point where you made the code changes. It will complain maybe a couple of, in
the future.
Or in a completely different part of the code base, because all the type invariance leaks through the code base. Yeah, you can't see that. I'm using my fingers now to sketch a picture. But and these things, I had a similar discussion. I don't know which programming language is your main language.
It's Go right now.
Go. Okay, I have no experience with that. But in C# you have you can define types either using explicit type like int or string or something. But you can also say var.
Yeah.
And
means variable.
Yes, well, it basically means the compiler will infer it for you. It's still completely safe runtime, compile time.
Yeah.
But you lose information. And some people will then say, but that information is not important. And they're quite often right. Unfortunately, now you have camps. You have people that say, no, you should always use an explicit type because every relationship, maybe you remember UML diagrams. If you draw an arrow between two classes, you typically have the role that the relationship represents, and the type of the class. These are two attributes. I mean, if you have a string, doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
But if it says string ISBN number, then you know it's an ISBN number and it's of type string. And some people say, but that's not really relevant. If it's an ISBN number, who cares? You're right. Quite often you're right. And I'm saying it depends on the particular case where it's perfectly fine to use var because you're not losing anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't create confusion. But in other case, you do.
Yeah, exactly. And those cases probably matter more.
Exactly. It's all the little things that sometimes it matters.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with almost, I don't know how we got there, but almost every principle in our profession. If you look at the solid principles, if you look at clean code, what else? Dry, Yagni, keep it simple, stupid. All those principles, people tend to be dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
Either you find people that are extremely on one side, like you need to apply dry, you need to apply solid. We need that abstraction. Every class needs to have an interface so I can mock it using a mocking library.
Yeah.
And you have people on the other side saying, no, you don't need that. I try to be, I hope I'm, again, like be naive, to be in the middle there.
Yeah.
If it makes sense, apply it. If it doesn't make sense, don't apply it. There's no single rule that's always applicable. Think of the people that come after you.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are with you on that, right? The answer is it always depends. And you know the truth as it is now, and you try and sort out things for the future, right? But you need to make your decisions accordingly, and you still need to be practical at some point. It's always weighing out pros and cons.
It is always a trade-off.
Yeah.
I do see some patterns, like you have people that are really good at industrializing software, making it maintainable for the future. And you have people that are really good at innovation.
Yeah.
I tend to see, I don't know if there's people that can do both. They can really, change the hat. I'm trying to.
Yeah. No, hat is global.
Yes. And I also see that people that tend to be more on the innovative side, they tend to not care too much about all this.
Yeah. Because
their main job is typically, and sometimes not really explicit, it's just the way they work, is they're really good at, coming up with new ideas, out of the box, wild solutions. But by the time that's done, they move to the next job.
Yeah.
So they never have to maintain their own thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not that good at innovation. I mean, I know that I'm always up to date what's going on in our profession, but I tend to look for solutions that fit the organization.
Yeah.
So if you really want to have like a completely new, disruptive way of looking at it, I tend to restrain myself. Like, okay, what does this company can do? What kind of capacity do they have? What people do they have? What's the installed base? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which means I care more about, maintaining this for long term.
Yeah.
And that can also sometimes create conflict, friction between those two camps.
Exactly, because the more you look into the future, the longer your decisions take, and the more robust initially you want to build. Because it's layer after layer, right? If your foundation is kind of messy, then the next layer will also be messy, and we'll take that with it.
But some people tell me or say that if you build your code bases from, let's say, building blocks or boundaries, then ideally you should be able to replace the internals of every little building block in your code base. Like if you compose your solution from little modules, very small modules, you can even say class is a module.
Sure.
If you keep your contracts intact and really well defined, then anybody can replace the internals of it. And then it doesn't matter, because they say that you should always be able to rewrite it at any point in time.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
It's not that black and white.
That's the thing. I mean, that assumes that the purpose of a particular class is rock solid, crystal clear. It assumes that the contracts between your classes are well defined.
Yeah.
But in reality, neither is true. None of them. I mean, people just produce code, and if you look at the same code 6 months later, you probably think like, I should have used a better name, or maybe I put too much responsibility in there.
Yeah.
And you have also junior developers that, just try to make it work and put more stuff in that code base without really thinking about, does that actually violate the responsibility of that piece of code?
Yeah.
But in reality, I mean, requirements change, code changes, you want new functionality.
Yeah.
And that means that even the interactions with all the modules will change over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it doesn't work. So for me, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
I don't see it working. I have never seen it working. I just don't buy it.
Yeah.
That's maybe my problem, but I don't buy it.
I mean, you're a guy that looks far into the future, right? And it might be variable. It might be 3 months down the line or a year down the line. Depends on the context. But you do keep that in mind, which means the decisions you make currently, it affects those, right?
To a certain extent, because there's a risk if you look too far in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, terms like Yagni and KISS, they didn't came from nothing. It's that people also tend to use those same principles as solid and design patterns to over-engineer for the future because they expect something to change.
Yeah.
I have tried that in the past. I've learned that this creates way too much complexity, too many layers of extraction, too many dependencies. So I stopped doing that. So these days I try to be a bit more pragmatic. You could say pragmatic. Some people say it's just naive or not really future proof.
Sure.
But I don't want to pretend I know the future.
Yeah.
I definitely know that product owners and product managers and those kind of people know the future. Yeah. They don't. So I try to keep it a bit more simple, less abstractions. So I try to organize all my code around boundaries, like functional boundaries, which is also my unit for testing.
Yeah.
It is internally, I try to keep things consistent, but don't repeat yourself dry. I don't apply it outside the boundaries to avoid too much coupling, which is usually what happens if you apply these principles too dogmatically.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to stay away from too much abstraction or too much generic code, because in the end, I think I learned this from an article that Jeremy D. Miller, he wrote a couple of libraries in the .NET space. He wrote something like in 2008. And he said like, the big problem with generic solutions is that they make assumptions about what the future will look like and try to predict what kind of flexibility you need. Yeah. The problem is by the time that somebody else wants to use that flexibility, the first thing he needs to understand, what was the thought process behind this abstraction? Yeah. And that's very hard because it's already hard to understand a piece of code and understand, if the code is well written, well documented, has proper naming, then at least you know what its purpose is, how it works. Yeah. But if it's generic, you also need to understand, okay, so what's the extension point here? What's the hook that I'm supposed to use? And quite often this is not very clear. Yeah. You see that also with frameworks. Like it's very hard to understand what happens under the hood. And then if you have that abstraction there, you spend more time trying to understand, okay, how was I supposed to hook into this generic extension point?
Exactly.
Versus, okay, now I understand what it does. I'm going to change it to make it work like I want to do. Yeah. And that is, I think, the fundamental thing behind Yagni, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, what is Yagni? Can you lay it out?
You ain't gonna need it.
You ain't gonna need it. Exactly.
Yeah, it's probably an American phrase. Something.
all those patterns, right? They're from kind of outside in. We see a trend in software development, and therefore it's a pattern, right? But it doesn't apply to everyone. That's the other way around. So you see what happens, therefore you have a pattern, but that doesn't mean that pattern applies to you. It applies to those people at that time.
In that context.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. Yeah. Patterns and principles apply to a particular context where they were extracted from. Yeah. And that's the problem. Like we just talked about Yagni. I also see a lot of developers that use Yagni as an excuse to just make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the flip side of the coin. Yagni on itself is a good principle, but it's more to remind yourself of don't over-engineer.
Exactly.
Don't add more complexity that you need at this point in time. Yeah. Which doesn't mean you don't need to make it maintainable. It just means you don't need that extra abstraction. You don't need to add an additional interface so that you can mock like multiple levels of mocking. That's not what we mean with that.
Yeah, exactly.
We mean that you get at the right level of complexity, but still make it maintainable. The intention should be clear, well described, self-describing, documented if that needs to be, for what you need right now. Nothing more.
Yeah.
And again, people misinterpret that. Or they interpret in the way that fits their thing. I mean, in the end, everybody's trying to do the best way.
Everyone's human, right? And they all have their own interpretation. I can read about a pattern and interpret it completely a different way than you would, because everyone makes their own choices. A set of patterns is never going to make you successful. It's how you apply it and how you keep in mind of them that they exist. So it's still how you apply yourself.
And it's funny because I attended a presentation at Domain Driven Design Europe.
Yeah.
And I forget the name. There's a Belgian speaker who's also the organizer. Matthias Farras, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Matthias. He actually had a presentation about design heuristics.
Yeah.
And he said, like, a lot of things that you do, because I had a discussion at some point, like, I make a lot of decisions based on gut feeling.
Yeah.
And I always try to understand, like, where's this coming from? Because less experienced developers don't get that. They want to have rules. They say, if this, then we use this pattern.
Yeah.
If then we use this principle.
Exactly.
For me, it's more fluid. I try to apply all the little things unconsciously, all the things I learned in my career, and try to understand what fits in this particular situation.
Yeah.
And he had a really great presentation explaining, like, why is this, what does that actually mean? What is it what you're doing? And he called them design heuristics.
Okay.
So principles, practices, and patterns that will give you a hint or move you in the right direction, but don't guarantee any success.
Yeah.
So it's not like if I apply this pattern, I solve a particular problem. No, this pattern tries to solve a specific problem in a specific context, has pros and cons. It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And you may try to apply it, and it will bring you maybe further. But one of the things he tried to do, or tried to teach us, also tried to think about the opposite. If you don't do it, what's the consequence of that?
Exactly.
And I started a little bit, like, it still hasn't really sunk in my mind, but I try to apply those principles more as heuristics now.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think.
It doesn't guarantee anything, but it may take you a step further to the direction that you want to take.
Yeah, and also ask that question, like, how could it go wrong if we do apply this? If it's in a lot of ways you don't even foresee, then just maybe try it out and see if it works or not.
Yep.
And if it doesn't work, then move on to the next one. There's a lot of things out there.
It's also not for nothing that the original authors of the Design Patterns book, The Gang of Four, like 10 years later said, like, we should have never called it like that. We should have called it like refactoring towards design patterns.
Exactly.
Because essentially what they're saying is that these patterns are just giving names to common solutions.
Yeah.
If I tell you an experienced developer, this is a factory or this is a singleton, then most people know what kind of behavior to expect.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that that they have to use certain names, but they have to say this is strategy implementation, and everybody knows what it means. At least I hope so. So it's more a communication tool.
Yeah.
And refactoring towards that means that you're refactoring your current code base towards well-defined structures, so that you can talk about it.
Yeah.
You can explain complex solutions by saying, this is an adapter, this one is the bridge, we have a strategy. So most people don't even know what to expect. A strategy, apparently there's a class with a context and that kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's the communication part that you do.
Yeah, that shared language.
Yes.
That makes it so we can actually communicate.
Exactly. It's almost like ubiquitous language, but then for software developers.
Yeah. I love that your initial thought of internal quality, as you coined it, is looking at the what, the why, and the how. And I love that the what comes from the tests, right? Because they usually describe what it does, not necessarily why, and give you the context. And how it does is actually the job of the code that's being tested, I guess. I've heard that before. Do you think that's a common train of thought, to initially look at the tests to be like, what's going on?
I mean, that's the whole premise of test-driven development.
Yeah.
That you design your code by means of tests. And but the problem with that is, and I've experienced this myself as well, that you can do it wrong really quickly.
In what way?
In the way that if you want your test to describe behavior, give you an indication how something is supposed to work, you need to be careful not to test too small.
Uh-huh.
And that's something I see a lot, especially with people that just started doing it. They followed the book. A class can be a self-contained thing, which solves a particular problem.
Yeah.
And then it makes sense to have your tests around that, define that behavior. You design this thing. But more often than, I actually see that it's usually a group of classes or whatever types you use in your language together solve a particular problem.
Yeah.
And the class itself or the classes that are part of that are just in like implementation details.
Exactly.
And then I tend to test the whole unit so I actually organize my code in functional folders, literally like that. And I use the functional folder as a kind of boundary of how I test. Because if you test too small and you discover over time that the responsibility of the class have been exceeded, even though it was warranted, you like to refactor that.
Yeah.
That shouldn't change the tests.
Exactly.
And if you need to rewrite your test every time you change your mind or you need to refactor your implementation, that's a smell. It's not a guarantee. I'm not saying it's always wrong.
Yeah.
But I've experienced myself that you end up with way too many tests that are really too small. So as soon as your design evolves and you want to redefine the responsibilities, maybe you want to refactor towards design patterns, you're screwed because you have to rewrite your tests.
Yeah.
If you take a little bit of a bigger scope, not too big, because I've seen that as well, and then it becomes very hard to understand why a test fails because there's so much code behind that.
Exactly.
So I try to find a balance in there. And by the way, you can complement each other. So smaller tests are easier to understand, easier to maintain, as long as you don't make them too small.
Yeah.
But you can have bigger tests, end-to-end tests, API level tests, component level tests. They're all complementary. It's not like you have to choose one over the other. They all add value.
Exactly. They're all layers of tests.
Yes.
And they'll all give you a different set of context.
Exactly. They increase your safety net. And like in .NET, it's pretty easy these days to, in a unit test, load the entire application and simulate HTTP traffic without using network.
Yeah.
All aspects of HTTP, so all the headers and cache links and e-tags. You can do that, and it's very easy to do that. But there's a risk that these tests end up becoming too big.
Yeah.
So if it fails,
it can be anywhere.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying don't do that as well, but also test at the unit. And again, the unit is not a class. A unit is a functional boundary.
Yeah.
Because then most likely you also have unit tests failing on the smaller boundary, so you know where it's coming from. It's just multiple level of tests on top of each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you said with the what and the how, if you change your how, which is how your code functions, and your what also fails now all of a sudden in the test, then you've tested too small, right?
Most
because
likely, yes.
Apparently you changed how it works. It should still have the same outcome in the what it does.
Exactly.
But somehow it fails.
I wouldn't say that's a principle, but it's a heuristic.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't always mean like it's wrong design that is behind that.
Yeah.
But it's most likely the case.
That's why I called it a smell.
Yeah, it's a smell. Yeah, you could say it's a smell. Yeah.
Exactly.
True. And that's also, by the way, it's good that you mentioned that because you actually talk about the observable behavior of a unit.
Yeah.
And again, a unit can be a class, can be a couple of classes together, a module.
Sure.
If your test only touch the observable behavior, then it's also much less likely that they break if you start to re-implement something.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, people still do like backdoor testing, like they create an abstraction, like a repository abstraction, and then mock it away, fakes and mocks. I think like, okay, if you really have that layered architecture, it's not really helping. Yeah. So layered architecture is for me like a smell these days, because it tries to put you in a position where your code it cannot be self-contained. It depends on too many other things.
Yeah.
And then it becomes more harder to test that component. You need to use mocks, and maybe you use mocks of mocks of mocks. Yeah. I've seen that because people are too dogmatic about solid.
Exactly.
But finding that sweet spot, that's the trick, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the weight of that code would be too hefty, which means you also need that same weight in testing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love that you made the distinction between internal quality and external quality. But I think there's a relation there, right? If your internal quality sucks, you're going to notice it outside as well at some point.
The problem with that statement is that it is not always true.
Okay.
Eventually, this will be true.
Yeah.
But the amount of time that goes between, internal quality sucks versus the external quality is going to suffer from that can be years.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the challenge. That's why a lot of non-developers don't get it.
Yeah.
Why a lot of managers don't get what technical debt is.
Yeah.
Why product owners favor a new functionality versus bringing down technical debt. And again, technical debt can also be used by developers. I see that as well, to re-architect things because they don't like it or they want to use a new tool.
Yeah. It's not the same.
It's not the same. But again, this is a topic that is very sensitive. There's a particular, again, you have to find a sweet spot here.
Yeah.
But external quality is usually well protected by product owners and quality assurance.
Yeah.
Because if the clients are suffering from it directly, if the performance is not good enough, if the UI is not responsive enough, if your progressive web app application doesn't scale really well in different form factors, that's really visible. And that will be a bug on your backlog, and nobody will debate whether it needs to be fixed.
Exactly.
But if you continuously run into internal constructs like the code is not clear, the responsibilities have been screwed up, people didn't really understand what they were doing. Like junior developer just trying to make it work.
Yeah.
They usually don't have the big picture. And if the code is doesn't have a screaming architecture where you immediately see like, hey, I'm in this module, I shouldn't actually be solving this problem here.
Yeah.
People will just try to fix that problem or implement a feature. And if you do that too long, you end up with really an obfuscated code base.
Exactly.
Where the original architecture is not visible anymore.
Yeah.
And trying to explain that, I experienced this as well, where the tech lead had a good point. The code was really bad and it was really difficult to make changes. But because this developer had the tendency to over-engineer solid, all this kind of stuff, too many abstractions, faking all over the place, the PO didn't trust that. Because although he understood that bringing down this technical debt was important, he was afraid that it ended up becoming an never-ending refactoring attempt.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between refactoring and redesigning.
Exactly.
And a lot of developers, when they talk about refactoring, they're actually redesigning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. I'm wondering where the responsibility lies, right? To keep that internal quality up to par, because a lot of devs fight for it, right? They say this is not going to work. This is not maintainable. We will feel this in the external quality at some point down the line, but it's so abstract. It's so hard to communicate that. And also to describe in words where it went wrong, right? If you put an architecture in place, it's like a hotel. And someone can say, well, you need to paint that room. And a junior dev goes to paint a room, but he's in the wrong room, right?
Yeah.
The room's painted, still does what it needs to, but it's the wrong room, right? And layer after layer after layer, you will notice that you have rooms which don't make any sense, have all kinds of different colors. And that's what you need to communicate.
Yeah, I think I read it somewhere. I'm not sure where, but there was the analogy of like restructuring in your house, rebuilding.
Yeah.
And you discover that there's a hole in the wall somewhere, or there's something really bad. And what you can do, sometimes you can just put some plaster on top of it and nobody will see it.
Yeah, like a poster.
Yeah, poster. Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you put a little wall in front of it.
Yeah. And
nobody knows that. But by the time you start to, like years later, you forget about that. Or maybe the next owner comes in. It's like the next developer comes in.
Yeah.
And this person needs to predict like how much work is it. So he's going to look at the code and, abstractions and functionality. But then he starts coding and then he runs into it. It's the equivalent of, okay, now I'm going to remove the plaster. Oh, crap. There's an old pipeline there, an old pipe, and we need to replace it.
Exactly.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because the previous owner, it worked.
Yeah.
We had water in the house.
Exactly.
It doesn't really work 100%, but it's pretty close to explain that. But it's too abstract.
Yeah.
It's too abstract.
Exactly.
And then it needs to be a trust thing.
Yeah.
So your PO needs to trust the developers or the tech lead, but it means the tech lead has responsibility of controlling the amount of refactoring you do. Because I know how it works. I maintain an open source project for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Every time I look at it, I often use it in my workshops as examples, and then I realize, crap, this is actually too complicated. Or the naming is wrong. I should refactor that.
Yeah.
And then I start refactoring it, and I try to keep my commits clean, But then I discover something new, and it's so difficult to not end up in that rabbit hole where you just make the thing bigger. I can also include this one.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's going to be more difficult in the future. This is something you need to stop. You need to control that.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's heuristic. If you keep it under control and you can show to your PO that you can do small incremental refactoring without blowing up the scope or completely screwing up the planning in your sprint planning, you increase the trust. And it should be balanced.
Exactly.
But it's hard.
And trust is such an interesting thing. I talked to Jethro about it, my buddy I had on earlier actually. And we said initially when you come in, you have probably some trust, right? Depends on what your predecessors did, but you always have an initial trust. But it goes away so quickly.
Yes.
And you need to have such incremental steps to win it back. and it's very hard. It's very hard to gain that trust back once it's already gone.
Yeah,
if
true.
you come in and there is no trust, man, that's a red flag, because you don't want to be in that situation.
And I've experienced this many times, and I can blame myself for losing trust in other people, because I see they don't get it yet. And this is the part I have not been able to solve. Like, what do you do if somebody doesn't really get it yet?
Yeah.
I mean, do you just let them try and fail themselves? That's what people say you should. But in the end, I feel like, but it's just a shame, because we're going to create a lot of crap now, which I know we're going to have to redesign later on.
Yeah.
Just because somebody should learn. And this is always a struggle. Like, I like to, and it all depends on in the context, but I like to, depending on the maturity of somebody, if I understand, like talking with somebody, like he understands, or she or whatever, understands the scales, the black and white, that is never black and white.
Yeah.
That's a good signal, because then I understand, okay, so he understands that everything is a trade-off, is not following something just because it's written in a book.
Yeah.
He thinks for himself. That's a good sign. It doesn't always mean it's easy, because he may have a different opinion than I have,
Yeah.
which usually is fine. But you cannot, sometimes you have to overrule it.
Exactly.
So I like to think, and I don't want to talk about juniors, because it sounds so negative, or it has a negative connotation. But if somebody just comes from school, they don't have the experience yet. I mean, they're very eager. They want to try things and build things. And then they suddenly are told by the tech lead, but this code needs to be smaller, refactored. Quite often, they don't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
Big method, refactoring. They just select a bit of code, make a new method out of it, extract method, refactoring path. That's not the solution.
Exactly.
And clean code is really good at that. Clean code tries to teach you that by having all your code in a method on the same abstraction level, you're going to capture the intent of that thing. But people don't get it. And what happens then is that people blindly apply, and then we go about dogmatism again, apply this principle, just extract method until I have all these small methods.
Yeah.
But then they go too far, and you end up with methods that do one thing.
Yeah.
Of course, so it's single responsibility, but the name just repeats what the code element is doing. You've overdone it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when that happens a lot, people start, but solid, you shouldn't do solid. Solid sucks.
Yeah.
We've
seen it happen.
And then people start doing presentations on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
Why the dark side of solid, or why you should not do solid. And people start to, quote those links like, hey, look at this, Dennis. Solid is really bad. Look at people saying. And then you watch the video, and you can already see that this person had a bad experience because it was applied differently or incorrectly. Yeah. And that's with everything. I mean, in my workshop, I often phrase the Gartner hype cycle.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know it, but it usually starts with a trigger for something new, a new framework, a new pattern, new principle.
Hype,
exactly. Well, I mean, maybe it's not, they don't see it as a hype, but something new. And then people start to apply it, and they get very enthusiastic about it. I remember when I was introduced with mocking libraries, sounded really cool. Now I can finally mock all the ugliness away. And people become very enthusiastic, and what happens? They write a blog post about it.
Yeah.
Maybe they create a YouTube video, or they go to a conference and talk about how awesome mocking library is. I did it myself, by the way.
Nice.
But then they start to see the flip side of the coin, the dark side, and they think, we should never do this. TDD sucks because you end up with all these small tests, and every time I design, you have to rewrite it. And they become negative about it. Yeah. Solid, TDD, you'll find if you go on YouTube or look for articles, there's plenty of them. They start writing articles about how bad TDD is, how bad solid is.
Yeah, exactly.
There's what they call, I think, the throw of a disillusionment. They're so negative. They're like, I thought this was the next best thing, and it's not.
Yeah.
And then at some point they realize, but you know what? If you apply it correctly, again, correctly is a bit subjective. But if you find the sweet spot when something works, the context that you talk about, then you become successful. I think it's called the plateau of productivity.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think with everything you learn, you go through that cycle.
I mean, I think so. I don't think it's a bad thing to make mistakes and to try things out, right? You need to experience some things, but it's also smart to listen to people around you that said, well, I don't think you're applying it correctly because these are actually the principles. Don't go too far on the scale and go on one side, because I mean, if it's like a zigzag, you'll be too much zag versus zig. I don't know if that's a good translation from Dutch to English.
No, but I get what you I get what you mean.
Yeah,
and that is true indeed, and that's the hard part of our job, of course.
Exactly.
Because if I look back at my own self, like 20 years ago,
yeah,
I probably wouldn't listen to a senior developer if he says something, because I want to figure it out myself.
Exactly.
But now I hate it because I see young people doing the same thing, and I think, but dude, man, if I were you, I would have listened to the experience here.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing with asking a question, right? I can give you the answer. I'll get you up to speed, and you can continue. Some people just want to dive into that rabbit hole and figure it out themselves. And I think you need to find a balance there in still being productive, learning on your own accord, but also listening to the people around you and not make those same mistakes over and over and over again down the line.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you're in the profession long enough, you see a pattern. You see people making the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah.
Or marketing something new as, oh, this is going to solve all your problems, but you can already see like the pattern behind that. And sometimes, by the way, that's also not a good thing, because you may think, because of your experience, that something it's the same as the last one.
Yeah.
We've seen this before. Sometimes there's really something disruptive. I think Git is a nice example. It's a disruptive technology that is not just a source control system. It changes the way people can cooperate.
Exactly.
Especially if you use GitHub. I mean, I've been on Codeplex in the past.
Okay.
TFS with my open source projects. Only when I start adopting GitHub, pull requests and forks and that kind of concepts, it started to fly.
Yeah.
People could contribute very easily. And now I see the same things. We've been applying that at client projects for the last couple of years. Well, last 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
And you can see the same thing happening. People can contribute to each other. You know, they collaborate because the tooling enables them in a very fluent and very natural way to contribute to code bases.
Yeah, it's just such a nice layer of context you can give. And I know it's important, but I love how you laid it out, that you can actually make it even more important if you use it to its fullest extent.
And even that topic by itself is worth like debates, because I recently saw a lot of articles about code reviews and pull request reviews, and it sucks and it doesn't add value. And I think it's also really tied to the rest. I mean, what I see is if you produce a pull request with hundreds of files without proper separation of changes, then the entire pull request review is completely wasteless.
Exactly.
Because nobody is going to review these 100 lines very thoroughly.
Yeah.
However, if those 100 files consist of a couple of functional changes, plus maybe you rename something which affects a lot of files, and you manage to put that in a separate PR or a separate commit, it's much easier, because in GitHub, for instance, you can review commit by commit.
Yeah.
I can look at the commit that actually changes, the name, and look at the name. Oh, the name makes sense. Next.
Yeah.
I don't even have to look at 50 or maybe 75% of the files in that pull request.
Exactly.
So delivering this high quality pull request with well-defined code, well-documented code, nicely separated the functional changes from the refactorings, also improves the whole review cycle as well.
Yeah. And the quality.
And the quality, obviously, because if you don't review, and some people say, but we do pair programming. I don't think anybody is doing pair programming all day, and they shouldn't. And I've tried it myself many times. Also observed teams. Pair programming is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah.
But not all day. You should probably do it with specific elements, but nobody is going to sit 4 hours in a row together to build new code. They do it when they are solving a problem.
Yeah.
Because then you have to combine minds. But usually what happens if people start pair programming, one is coding and the other one is just sitting on the phone.
Yeah.
And then
it's not as effective.
It could be in some way it can be effective.
Yeah.
Because the theory is that you're going to challenge each other. But I've not seen that happen a lot.
Okay.
In the end, I see the people ending up in the same tunnel vision, and you really need somebody else really looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah. I love that you say, well, it depends on how you apply it, right? I've had a guy on, and he was super enthusiastic about pair programming, but he always laid out that when it was a complex problem, then they would pair up on that or even mob up on that, and they would get the value because of the complexity, right? If you're doing some mundane thing that needs to be done, I can watch you, but I don't think it's going to be effective.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. What is effective, I think, is swarming on changes. So if we have to change a lot of things, like implement some like relatively complex thing, what I try to do with the teams is have them break it down into chunks of work that we can work on in parallel. Because again, as I said, pair programming can be effective, but it also needs to fit your character.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not a person to sit together with somebody else because my brain works differently. Or I'm just antisocial. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah.
But the point is that often it's much better to try to break it down so you can work together on different parts and then just commit to the same branch.
Yeah.
You know, so that you just add bits and pieces.
Exactly.
But it requires a bit of structure. Sometimes it works by, let's say you want to rebuild something. Define the boundaries of what you want to rebuild.
Yeah.
Maybe an empty class with some, methods that make sense. Commit that to your branch and then start to implement the implementation so that the rest of the team or the rest of the people that you swarm with can already implement some logic that depends on that class, even though there's no logic in there.
Yeah.
So then it's almost like drawing a picture by drawing the outline and then gradually starting to fill in the blanks in that picture.
Exactly.
This is something I saw working really well. Also works really well for me because that means, you can easily, and it also works really well with reviews because you may not have to do a thorough review from the start, but every time you do a pull request on a shared branch, you can just, figure out or do a little bit of a check like, okay, does that actually mean we're filling up the blanks in this outline correctly?
Yeah.
Are we going the right direction? Yes, merge, because we can do the real review much later.
Exactly.
But it's all about getting a fast feedback cycle where people get early feedback like, are we actually moving in the right direction?
Yeah.
Not always possible, not always successful, but I've seen it be more successful than pair programming.
Yeah. I love that you said that in essence, it's about getting that feedback and getting it fast, right? The faster, the better, because then you can still correct and be like, well, no. You drew outside of the line here. We need to go back and make sure we're inside of the line. Makes a lot of sense.
I hope so. And but I'm also notorious or sometimes for doing really thorough reviews.
Yeah.
I've been a bit more relaxed the last couple of years, but I mean, you don't really want to use a pull request to start, complaining about layout and brackets.
Yeah.
So one thing I try to apply, I think I read it somewhere, is emojis in pull request reviews. To emphasize, there's a bunch of emojis. We can probably share the link and maybe there's some show notes at the end.
Sure.
Which emphasize like when I do a pull request, like this is a suggestion.
Yeah.
That could make it better. This is actually me nitpicking. Yeah. It's up to you whether you want to apply it, like naming or layout rules or something like that. This is something that's really wrong because it violates an agreement or a standard or some kind of rules we follow, or it's just wrong because there's a big issue there.
Yeah.
And then you have one for saying like, I'm not sure, I think it might be wrong. So let's at least discuss it face to face before you merge the changes.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of like a thumbs up, like, hey, this is actually nice. You don't want to use it too often. And a clown to emphasize like, I know this is outside what you were doing, but if you touch this code, maybe you can also fix that. Yeah. That's one of the tricks I try to use because it forces me to also think about, okay, how important is this for me as a reviewer?
Exactly.
So until, of course, people start to ignore all my suggestions, at some point I would say no. And in GitHub, if you do a pull request review, you can say something like comment changes, request change, or approve.
Yeah.
So if the majority is just suggestions and nitpicks, I would just improve it immediately and people can decide whether they want to do it or not.
Exactly.
But if there's a lot of questions like, this might actually be wrong, then it becomes a comment.
Yeah.
So I don't approve it, don't reject it. So I have my way of also, make it very clear to the reviewer or to the author of the pull request, like how important is it?
Yeah.
And force myself to also think about this up front.
Yeah, your intent. Like, what do you mean with this piece of text?
Yes.
And I love that you use emojis to convey that.
I didn't simple.
It's so simple. And it sounds, I think I might use that. I might steal that from you.
It's funny because there were some senior developers that were like, oh, but that's so childish. I said, well, we don't need it. You can just type it out. Yes, we can type it out. But it's for me, it's a nice trick.
Yeah.
Because it really forces me to consider the severity of my comment. There's another trick, by the way. I don't know if you have other topics, but sometimes you work on a pull request and we talked about, restraining or constraining the scope of the change, especially when you're refactoring.
Yeah.
And quite often, there's an article I read on InfoQ, I think it's called The Natural Cost of Refactoring, where you're changing some code and then you realize like, this code is weird. I don't know how to fix it and I don't want to spend time on it right now. but something is wrong. This class has the wrong responsibility, or this doesn't belong there. I use a smell comment.
Okay.
So it's literally / in C# comment, / smell.
Yeah.
Me explaining what's the smell, which is kind of a breadcrumb for me, that maybe, the next person that looks at that.
Yeah, to also find it.
And may find it and may actually be refactoring it and realize like, hey, I actually know what to fix that. Or we're going to fix it anyway.
Yeah.
The other one is refactor. Mm-hmm. So / refactor, where you're saying, I know how we should refactor this.
Yeah.
I already know that this should be moved to this class, but I want to keep my pull request to a minimum. I leave a breadcrumb for my future self or my colleague that the next time I touch that, maybe I do have time to refactor that.
Yeah.
And that also works really well for me. Because, you can put it in a bug or issue in an issue tracker system, but then it's disconnected from what are you actually looking at.
Yeah.
How are you going to describe a code smell in a Jira ticket?
Exactly.
It's not working. You need to keep it with the source.
Yeah.
And that works really well for me, I have to say.
Yeah.
One of the nicest tricks I've learned.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Like all those layers you've laid out, they all sound so interesting to me, and I could see how they could be effective. But it's never something I would think of myself.
Me neither.
It's
I just read.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I mean, continuous improvement. I'm always trying to find new things to do that job better.
Yeah, that is really cool. Man, we really went down the quality rabbit hole. I think we can do a whole other show about the different aspects of quality. But I think we'll leave it off here. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
It was great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. No problem. Ladies and gentlemen, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
No problem.